Afternoon and welcome back to the weekly conversations organized by the European Training Foundation. We apologize for being slightly late compared to what we had foreseen, but we're all here and ready to get engaged in a conversation with you all wherever you are in the globe. So this conversation is about a very relevant topic, which is virtuous finance for education policies. And indeed, we would like to explore how to build a new European model of international development, which can take shape around three main pillars, which we're going to discuss today with the three speakers. These being partnerships, investment packages, and the new Team Europe approach. Indeed, at the European Training Foundation, we do believe that we all need to work together in partnership, and we need to find new ways so as to improve the impact of investments by securing better cooperation between education and training and labor market systems in this transition and developing countries. And by the way, in the month of November, we are running a communication campaign precisely on the topic of networks and partnerships for change. Beyond that, we think that international cooperation relies on investment packages in which international financial institutions have been playing a growing relevant role, in particular at the times of pandemic in which we are still living in wherever we are. And at last, it's worth mentioning that in early 2020, as the pandemic began to spread, the European Union took action with its member states and the financial institutions to deliver a collective global response, laying the foundations of a more unified European approach to international development, the so-called Team Europe. But I think I spoke already for too long, so all of these we would discuss with the distinguished speakers of today. So please let me introduce them right away. And I'd like to welcome Anna Canato, Head of Education and Public Research, Project Directorate at the European Investment Bank. Thank you for being with us, Anna.
Thank you, Daria. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you. And thanks a lot also to Erja Kaikkonen, Head of Policy and Public Outreach Department of the European Training Foundation. Thank you for being with us, Erja.
Thank you, Daria. It's nice to be here and to see all of you.
And last but not least, thanks a lot to Mehmet Uvez, Principal Inclusion Specialist and new Head of the Ankara Office of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Thanks, Mehmet.
Thank you, Daria, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to meet all with the colleagues and audience.
Thank you very much. So welcome, colleagues, and also welcome to all of you who are following this conversation on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Please say hi, let us know where you're from, and don't hesitate to share questions and requests for information. I'll be glad to share them with the speakers, so take part in this conversation. But now let's this interview and chats begin, and I'd like to address, so ladies first, I'd like to address Anna. Actually, the education, research, and innovation are at the core of the European Investment Bank's actions to improve Europe's competitiveness and sustainability. Can you explain to the speakers and to all those who are following what are the current priorities of the EIB in terms of financing education? And regarding countries outside of the European Union, do you think that the international financial institutions are interested to finance reforms beyond infrastructure-only investments in education? Anna, thank you for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you, Daria. I gladly take the question. So I get our two main questions. The first one, priorities in financing education and skills, and second, a focus on outside Europe. So, I mean, it's difficult to say what is a priority. Our take on this is that, and I'm sorry to delude you a little bit on that everything is a priority in education. What we see what we see here at the European Investment Bank, looking in Europe and outside Europe, is that the investment gaps in education are huge. And this is something that we used to say even before the COVID crisis, that there were studies. We had run a study about what are the investment gaps in education in Europe, and the number is frightening. It was about 15 billion of euro every year, just in the European Union before the COVID crisis. And after the COVID crisis, we can only believe, even if no study was run yet, that the number can just be increased. The COVID crisis has struck hard on the education sector everywhere, and we have all learned how it was difficult for schools to deal with all the changes that were necessary. We have seen how teachers, they need to be supported with new technologies. So I would say that the emergency and the priority are overall, but forced. If I have to really name two priorities, one is very broad, is public education at large. Public education needs to be supported in terms of renewing the infrastructure, making them more relevant for the current pedagogy, and supporting the teachers in the changes. And the second one is about vocational training and adult reskilling. Again, the COVID crisis, we think, has put even more visibility on a trend that was already there, on the change in the labor markets, on the digitalization, on the digital transformation of industries, and all these bring to new skills that are necessary in the job market across sectors. And this is something where education systems, but also companies, they need to invest more. The second part of the question, you asked me to reflect on outside Europe and whether we are keen to look at reforms, investment, and not just infrastructure. Let me put it in this term. Every time that there is an infrastructure involvement, the way we see it at the EIB is that you don't renew an infrastructure unless you have a plan to renew something in the education system at large. So you may see the infrastructure because that is the large need. There is where there is a big need for money, and there being a big investor, we are visible there. But this is something that we look in all our projects. When we invest in a country, when we put money in a country to support renewal in education, is because we know that there is a plan of transformation, of improvement, or reforms in the system. So this is something that we are very focused on, and we think is important, even more so in a Team Europe orientation.
Thank you very much, Anna, for putting under the spotlight two areas which are key, such the support to teachers and vocational education and adult learning, and also for pointing out that renewal is supported when there is a plan. I think we'll go back to this in the next phase, but before giving the floor to the next speaker in this conversation, I'd like to say hello to the first and less shy followers who are saying where they are. So I'd like to thank Dana from Jordan, Aspasia from North Macedonia, Mahmoud from Egypt, and Barda from Albania. If you're following, please let us know where you're from. It's interesting for us to have a perception of the geographic scope. Next, to Erja from the European Training Foundation. Erja, the European Union has recently launched a new financial instrument for development assistance, which sometimes we call by an acronym, which means the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, which puts a lot of emphasis on partnerships. Some call it a paradigm shift in cooperation. What do we mean by that? Over to you, Erja.
Thank you very much, Daria, and it's nice to hear from Anna that in a true Team Europe, how do you say, approach, or our priorities are very much aligned, and we see the same thing from our side, and most of the EU interventions planned in our partner countries, but also in Africa, I think 2/3 include a vocational education and training component or a skills development component in them. So the EU priorities are aligned across the board through different institutions, and that's very nice. On the paradigm shift that you're talking about, Daria, I think it's partnerships are twofold, and on one side we have a mandate and also an interest to all of us work more closely in partnerships, and it's also in the ETF strategy. Now, the paradigm shift that you are mentioning now is more linked to probably the type of the partnership that we have with our partner countries. And this is where the paradigm shift happens, that we move away from a traditional development cooperation to more equal partnerships with all our partner countries. And this is because the world is moving fast. It's changing, it's increasing in complexity and becoming more competitive as well. And the issues that we are all facing are very much global issues linked to inequality, climate change, the digital transition that we know about, all of us, and the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic is also a global problem, among others. So it is no longer the case that we in the Western development world, if I may, have all the answers and solutions. We learn from each other and we develop those answers together, and from different contexts, and need to all work together towards those. So finding the answers and solutions to the global problems require partnerships as equal partners. And as Commissioner Urpilainen has also said, we need to move strategically towards a world that is green, digital, and fair, and with equal opportunities for all. But that means that we all have to together set the agendas and the priorities, form the objectives together, and ensure the implementation of our actions together. But of course, at the same time, with the new challenges and the new partnerships, we cannot apply the same cooperation mechanisms that we had before. So we have to move away, as I said, from a traditional donor-recipient relations to more involvement of investments and more involvement of the private sector in everything that we do. And in the EU sense, the paradigm shift is also so moving away from the mechanisms to the tools that we have at our disposal. So we do not provide so many grants or projects in one area or sector anymore, but rather work together with the private sector and replace grants with loans to partner countries, and have this investment that brings sustainability to the interventions. And this is where we have to learn, all of us, to work better together as well, because traditionally we're very good at working with we have our priorities and our objectives, and then we have an implementing partner who implements those activities. But what we need to do now is to learn how to work better with investment banks and with direct investments, with loans and guarantees and blending mechanisms, which are not something that we are so used to necessarily doing, but we're getting better at it every day. And at the same time, we have to ensure that our common policy objectives are respected, and the investments that we make advance those policy objectives and are still linked to, especially to the inclusiveness goals that we have. So we want them to be inclusive, and for example, in the field of education and skills, the development needs to be accessible to also minority groups, women, young people, and people with disabilities. And it is important that the investments and the private sector are all moving towards this goal. And I think that's something that we have a lot of experience in Turkey with the EBRDs. I look forward to hearing from Mehmet on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erja. You flagged about cooperation with investment bodies, and you already announced Mehmet. So I'm very glad to ask him about the EBRD, which is the International Financial Institutions that supports projects from Central Europe to Central Asia and the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean. So, Mehmet, what are the specificities of these regions as regards the cooperation with EU bodies for the implementation of projects which focus on issues that are at the heart of the countries? And also congratulating you on the new role as the head of the Ankara office. From the country where you're currently based, is there any particular story which you could flag? Over to you, Mehmet.
Many thanks, Daria. Also to my colleagues, Anna and Erja from ETF, for these good introductions. Thanks again also for this opportunity on behalf of my institution. I would like to salute every audience from different countries of operations. Maybe, Daria, before I jump into what we are doing in different countries of operations together with EU, ETF in Turkey, it will be good to give a short background of the EBRD and the EBRD's mandate, how it works in different areas and in countries. So EBRD has a distinctive mandate. Basically, it is to promote private and entrepreneurial initiative and to foster transition towards open market-oriented economies, which are competitive, integrated, resilient, green, well-governed, and inclusive. So these are what we called in our jargon our transition qualities and objectives that we seek to achieve in each of our investments. So since our establishment some 30 years ago, we have invested more than 150 billion euros in over 6,000 investment projects. Today, we are operating around 38, close to 40 economies, different countries of operations, from Morocco to Mongolia, Estonia to Turkey. And around 80% of our investment is in the private sector. So I think this is a distinctive, quality that differentiates us from the other MDBs. So I would like to open a parenthesis, special parenthesis to our partnership with EU first. Our partnership with the EU is deep and broad and dates back to early days of the establishment of the bank. Not only EU is the bank's most important donor, but also as a shareholder. So among our more than 70 different shareholders, EU Commission representing EU and the European Investment Banks are the, institutional and supranational shareholders. So we have a very strong tie with the EU partnership. Together, we have also developed, not only in terms of the donor relationship and shareholder relationship, we have developed new ways of delivering projects, championing best practices and policies to deliver on our common objectives. So we both pursue the multilateralism as the only possible way to achieve the sustainable development goals. So if I go back to your question on different countries and how we operate, how we establish the partnership, so different cases necessitate different approaches. As I mentioned, there are 6 transition qualities which the bank has identified for the goal of establishing a sustainable, well-functioning market economy in its countries of operations. So the bank is measuring the transition gaps for these 6 transition qualities quantitatively for each countries of operation by using its own technical measurement system. And then we adapt these results to each country's strategy at the macro level. For example, with inclusive component, which has the highest gap in Turkey, resilient is the highest in Azerbaijan, and the competitiveness is highest in Egypt. So different approaches are required for these different countries of operations. At the project level, each financing deal that we promote has to meet certain requirements about these transition qualities, which in turn contributing to close the transition gaps each country has. And the progress is monitored by calculating scores in order to identify the success levels, as well as to use them to design the needed strategy for countries of operations. So, in terms of examples from our countries of operations, I will start by some policy dialogue achievements in Kazakhstan, where, as in many other Central Asian countries, we established partnerships for the current labor laws, which still contain a list of jobs women cannot hold. As a result, the Ministry for Labor and Social Protection signed a legislative order to reduce the list by more than 100 occupations, opening up new and well-paid employment opportunities for women. Also, from another country of operation, and I see some attendance from Jordan, the bank is supporting the Abdali Mall company training centers at the newly built mall in Jordan, with training provision linked to the expected needs of companies in the center. Since its launch in 2017, more than 350 young people have been vocationally trained and then placed into the different jobs. And among these young people, I can say with pride, there are more than 100 Syrian refugees have been trained and also placed into different job postings. In Jordan, we also support and work with EU and other donors to support the creation of sector skill councils, which brings together private sector employees with various entities, supporting the skills development and employment in the country. The platform already enables public and private sector actors to design occupational skill standards in the property and tourism sector. Maybe last example from Egypt. I also see some attendance from Egypt. In Egypt, we are working on a number of projects. One of them is El Sevidi Technical Academy, a technical vocational secondary school, to expand their offer of quality accredited training for young people. So the El Sevedi Group, founders of the academy, have committed to increasing student numbers from 200 to over 500 over the years. So this is another partnership we have established locally. And thanks to our operations and our physical presence in all our countries, we can populate these examples. But as my colleague Erja mentioned from ETF, we have a unique case from Turkey. In Turkey, the EBRD and the Ministry of National Education joined forces to promote greater employment and learning opportunities for
Mehmet, I think we lost him. Just give us a second. We are used to these things happening. Mehmet, you got cut for a second. You said that in Turkey there is a unique project. If you maybe can start from scratch.
Yes, thank you, Daria. I just realized that for a second I was cut.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, in Turkey, I was mentioning the unique experience with the EU, ETF, and the line ministries. So the EBRD and Ministry of National Education joined the forces to promote greater employment and learning opportunities for young people. In this context, we have signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Education and EBRD. Also, in this memorandum of understanding, ETF has been designated as the strategic partner to complement the policy angle. So a senior level public-private sector policy working group has been established in partnership with ETF, EU delegation in Turkey, the Ministries of Education and Labor, also EBRD's private sector clients. It has become the main discussion platform to assess the progress, exchange ideas and experiences, and determine future challenges and possible solutions, especially in terms of the skill standards in the most relevant sectors EBRD is working. So maybe I should stop at this point and give the floor back to you. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Mehmet, also for having provided some background info on what the EBRD is and where it operates, and also for having flagged examples from Kazakhstan, Jordan, Egypt, and last but not least, Turkey, because the scope of these conversations is not only to be talking about the speakers and the institutions which they represent, but precisely also to make it clear for anyone who is following how things work, what's the process, and then also what are the results and the impact at a local level. I also appreciate that you gave a look to the hello messages which are popping up in the chat. And I'd like to follow up on that to say also hi to Arafat from Palestine, Abdi from Turkey, Serene from Italy, Riyadh from Tunisia, Gochan from Turkey, Diamond from Myanmar. And there are many more people following the conversation, and keep on letting us know where you're from. Going back now to Anna from the European Investment Bank. The EIB is one of the top partners for the Team Europe Investments, which we have explained at the beginning what they are. And this means that the EIB is also somehow influencing the areas in which deserve more funding. How do you at the EIB select the priorities in the geographic scope, mainly as far as education and skills development is concerned? Anna.
Thank you. Thank you, Daria. So in this respect, whenever we operate, it's important to clarify, whenever we operate outside Europe, we are operating on European Commission mandates. So in that respect, this is all related to the European Commission and how it is decided that intervention outside Europe needs to be. Then in practice, we do have mandates to operate in most regions, and in particular in the European neighborhood, in the North neighborhood, so North Africa, or in the Eastern neighborhood, so in the closest part to Europe and in the Western Balkans. These, I would say, the areas where we are the most active at the moment. Then it is important to say that as a bank, we are not policymaker, we are policy taker. So we don't aim to influence the discussion around the education sector that happen in specific countries. In that respect, we do look at our standards in terms of climate and social, but our perspective is that every country has its own specificity, and the education sector is something that is very linked to the culture and the evolution of a country. So in a nutshell, the way in which we work is very much demand driven. So we partner with all the other institutions, the European Commission, ETF, and other institutions that are active in education. But as a financier, as an IFI, we are, let's say, in the back waiting for requests to come our way, and then at that moment we look at how these requests are linked to the country, and whether and how we can provide support where we are sure, where we can be made comfortable that our intervention can improve the impact in the country. Maybe it's easier by making some examples. So, for example, at the moment we are quite active in Tunisia, where we are financing a large program of investments in secondary schools, which involved, on the infrastructure side, it involves the construction of new schools. It involves the construction of new school and the refurbishing of other ones, but it also there is also an active technical assistance that looks at how we can improve experience in the schools, how we can improve the pedagogical aspect of the schools, and the technical assistance has been financed by the European Commission. In the moving to another region, for example, in the Western Balkans, recently we have worked very close with Serbia and with Montenegro to look at their education strategies, to look at the investments that are needed to improve digital skills in the countries, but also pre-primary education. So these are I would say there is not a standard EIB project. It very much depends on the dialogue and the initiatives that are happening country by country, and with the priorities that are set up by the European Commission and the discussions with the local European delegation. These are all aspects that we take into consideration. And in this respect, I really appreciated the intervention of Mehmet before. We are very complementary to the EBRD. We are we have a focus on public education, above all when we look at pre-primary, primary, and secondary education, because we see, as it is aligned with the view of the Commission, that basic education is something that needs to be inclusive and equitable, and there is a strong role of public systems in being involved in this part of education. Then, as we move more towards higher education, this is the area where we are looking then at also the private sector, as for example in Morocco, together with the European Commission, we are supporting the establishment of a university in Fez, which is something that has a strong importance also in terms of brain drain, of preventing brain drain, of allowing education to happen in the territory, and to bring knowledge, to reinforce the knowledge that can be created locally.
Thank you very much, Anna. You flagged 2 points which are making me doubt on who should follow next, but I think I'll follow the point on the complementarity and, for example, between the EBRD and the EIB, to go back to Mehmet, because one of the big questions of the Team Europe approach is precisely how the division of labor among our actors will take place, and this topic is absolutely in line with our campaign of the month, which is aiming at exploring partnerships and how to keep them meaningful, but also very effective. So what is your view as regards efficient and successful ways of operating, also following up on what Anna has just flagged on the complementarity between different bodies?
Thank you, Daria. Thank you, Anna, also for the opening into this new passage. So again, I believe it's important to identify which actors have which type of comparative advantages and share the responsibilities based on that to use the strengths efficiently. As I have mentioned earlier, EBRD has a strong engagement and a focus on private sector. And we work very closely with our private sector clients from different sectors and regions. Thus, in division of labor, our general tendency is to bring the private sector's voice to the table. Therefore, when we aim to support clients who provide employment and vital services to millions of people, we see cooperation is crucial. We need to partner with national governments, as well as regional and local authorities, as well as other IFIs such as EBRD, EIB, ETF, EU Commission, UN agencies, to help shape effective policy responses to the challenges they face. As Anna mentioned, we are really complementary, I think, in terms of the education investments and the policies. To be frank, we are not in the infrastructure investment framework for the primary and secondary education. Generally, it's a big debate within the bank as well, whether to invest in the bank in terms of the equality of opportunity. And since we don't go into the sovereign loans in terms of the school infrastructure and investments co-financed by government and the EBRD, this is a little bit, how I say, in between area for us. But our general focus, as Anna mentioned, is to complement the upper and the higher education, where we are looking for equality of opportunity for young people, women, people living in less developed regions of our countries of operations, and more recently, refugees, migrants, and people with disabilities. So our aim is to more focus on the transition from school to work, in that sense to complement the vocational and technical education provided by the education ministries and education providers. So in specific investments, I think we are at that point similar to European Investment Bank. We are also demand driven. So we turn our policies and then technical assistance where the investment is coming from. So let's give an example. If we are establishing a large automotive manufacturing investment in the middle of Anatolia, we try to establish partnership with local vocational and technical and vocational schools between the company that we are providing financing. Also, we help them support to develop their skill standards in that sense. So this is our overall objective. In terms of the systemic effect, we are really looking forward to work with policy organizations. As I mentioned in our previous question, we are working very coherently with ETF. I think we are complementing each other in a perfect manner in certain countries of operations. ETF has a huge policy expertise and network within the ministries of labor, education, providers, even from private sectors. And we, on the other hand, able to bring the private sector to the table. So private sector can define its needs in terms of the skills needs, skills mismatch issue, and we closely work with ETF to complement each other. Also, another example I can give from the ground is from the Western Balkans. We joined forces with International Labour Organization, especially after the COVID crisis, to advise national policy action and support workers and enterprises. And since speed was of the essence in crisis environment, we worked hard to formalize this cooperation within only a couple of weeks for the creation of a joint task force with the ILO. And the objective of this partnership was to assess the impact of the crisis on the region's economies by examining the likely short and medium-term employment and labor market effect, and to develop policy responses taking into account the measures already announced by each government in the region. And we have very concrete results from this joint task force, and in a number of countries in Western Balkans, there have been legislative changes as recommended by this joint task force. Maybe just final example, we are working recently with UNDP. UNDP's International Center for Private Sector Development Center, based in Istanbul, but working globally. We also joined the forces between the EBRD and UNDP to develop an online global network for businesses to promote skills development in an inclusive way. So as my colleagues Erja and Anna mentioned, at the heart of this partnership with UNDP lies green economy transition, digital transformation, and inclusiveness. So soon you will be hearing more and more on this partnership, and we will aim to bring different development actors, including EIB and ETF into this well-established network.
Thank you
these
very
are some examples. Thank you, Daria. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mehmet. Following up on what you and Anna just said, I mean, I've heard about Anna flagging the fact that the EIB is a policy taker, not a policy maker. Mehmet, you said that in some cases, EBRD is turning policies where investments are coming from. Now, Erja, let's also put the European Training Foundation in the picture. Where is the ETF willing to play a key role in this process?
Thank you very much, Daria. And that, oops, my computer is falling. I'm sorry for that. No, thank you for the question, and thank you also colleagues Mehmet and Anna for painting the picture, because I think it's easier for me to understand to speak about the ETF role that when you have already done half of the work, let's say. So in a Team Europe spirit and initiative, what is important is that we're all very coordinated and coherent in what we do in a country, and I think we are already doing that very well, even though they are not always called Team Europe initiatives yet, but maybe in the future. But it's working indeed extremely well. And as Mehmet just said as well, that ETF is a policy organization. We don't have funds and lots of money to put into a country, and that's where we rely on others and on investments and so on and so forth. But we do have a lot of expertise, and we have a historical presence in many of our partner countries, which makes it that we have an institutional knowledge of what works and what does not work at the system level, but also at the provider and level, and so on and so forth, and in different levels. There is a need for more public sector investments, as have already been set in the field of education and training beyond infrastructure, for example, in the development of curricula. And this is something that ETF can play a role in. Thematically, how we work is in two dimensions. We work either at the human capital development and education policies level, in the general level, at system level, or we can also work on a particular sector and on the skills development part of that sector investment, for example, be that tourism or private sector development or the automotive industry, agriculture, and so on and so forth. Now, how we do that and how we play a role in this Team Europe or team partnership aspect is through different ways as well. It can be on knowledge development, and for example, we have a thematic development with the joint study between ETF and EBRD. Or a joint policy dialogue on a specific sector, be it tourism in Jordan, for example. So that's something that we can do on a study level or a policy dialogue level. We can work on the skills dimension of investments and provide inputs for different projects in the sector in a very more specific. A specific aspect. For example, ETF is working with EIB, with the European Investment Bank, on an investment for a technology university in Egypt. And so that's one example. But we can also have a more European institutional role in the framework of EU programming. So we intervene at many stages of the programming cycle, and we can provide policy advice on the design of the project, or actually even on the programming priorities based on the studies and the work we have doing. We can contribute in the planning phase or monitor and evaluate programs that are already in place. So we can work on different parts of the cycle, but always bringing that policy and institutional expertise to the table.
Thank you very much, Erja. We've had a full round, so as to present also the different identities of the organizations and how they can be complementary. And this is also why we're having this conversation, is also to show the complexity of cooperation among the different actors, but at the same time the concrete results and impact, which all of you have very clearly highlighted in your interventions. I think it's now time to bring in one question from Khaled Abulaban. Thank you for having raised it. I'll highlight it on screen so that you all can see it. I think Khaled is going back to the minorities and vulnerable groups issue, and he's asking what are the most important criteria for providing equitability of education to vulnerable groups in refugee communities. Maybe Mehmet, you'd like to take that on board.
Thank you, Daria. I will do my best. Thank you, Khalid, also for this important question. I think this is the one of the most important aspects of our time and what we are going through in terms of the different refugee and migrant crises. So in that sense, what I can give you is a concrete example from Turkey, where the number of refugees are, I think, close to officially 5 million. And nearly 1/3 of this population is at the school age. So this is quite a challenge in Turkey that we are experiencing, and we are in discussion with the Ministry of National Education and local education providers. So what I have seen and observed so far, this is a quite sensitive area. One aspect is the cultural and cohesion side from the refugee community in terms of adaptation into the local education system. So in Turkey, let's say, give the example, the basic education, even the early childhood education has become compulsory from age 5. I mean, in terms of the Syrian refugee community, this wasn't the case back in Syria. So the government is working closely with different refugee communities spread wide over the country to grasp this group of early childhood Syrian communities into the national education system. So this was a challenge. In terms of the other sections of the education system, there has been different problems. And the government and the local education departments, Ministry of National Education, are working closely with the different communities in the country to enroll the refugee children into the different parts of the education system. So what I know as a final figure is around 70% of this population has been enrolled into some extent to the education system. But this problem doesn't end here. There's another aspect in terms of the integration of these children into the education system, but also integration of them into the host community. So we are seeing many different cases in different areas of the country that the cohesion is not very strong. This can be understood. This was a large influx without an unprecedented way, and the numbers are really high. So generally, there are specific programs are being implemented to make this cohesion even further, but it takes time. It's not an easy task. That's what I can say. But in terms of the more on the secondary and high school part, I see better results in terms of the transition from school to work and employment opportunities. At that level, the education system is much more, how I say, successful up to now. This is maybe in a nutshell, I can tell. There are a lot of anecdotes, but we have limited time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for having taken on board the question from Khaled. This also leads me to an announcement which I'm happy to anticipate compared to the next days, because as of next Wednesday we'll be running a campaign which is precisely focusing on skills and migration. So we'll be exploring further this topic. We don't have much time left, but I'd like to take another question from our participants who are following from the remote on board. This is a matter of trust, and I see that Mahmoud is asking, is there a mechanism in place to support educational reforms in developing countries in the global south? I don't know if Anna, would you like to take this one? Yes, and then I'll give the floor to Erja for one last remark. Anna.
Yes, thank you. Looking at this question from my viewpoint, I can say that, and thank you very much, Daria and Erja and Mehmet, to speak about cooperation. I think what is not visible from the outside and from the country is the amount of interaction that is happening between all the different institutions. What we see, what to communicate, maybe sometimes is on the projects, but before a project is arrives to financing, there is a lot of discussion. So from our perspective, the main mechanism that we see in place is the discussion that the European Commission and an institution like ETF are having with all the countries. From our perspective, let me say, we personally don't believe that much in financial incentives to support educational reforms, because any reform is a complex endeavor and needs to be well institutionalized and well discussed and brought forward in the country. But the role then, and I think Erja can complement very much on that. From our perspective, in our humble role as financier, we try to do our best in this very complex sector that is education. The way in which we get into is by being in face of a country and say, look, we know that there is a reform going on, and we believe this reform is important, and we will refrain to make investments or to engage further in investments before we see the reforms taking place. This is the type of discussion that we had, for example, just today with one country, and this is the mechanism that we use in this respect. This is the type of answer that I can give to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. I hope we've satisfied the interest and our followers for their question. There is also a comment by Lida who is flagging. I will put it on screen just in a second. And this is a message from my colleague who is in charge of the technical part. Matteo, the private sector is active in accommodating the skills of the refugees and providing an upskilling of the young people for employment in some of the sectors in Turkey. The European Training Foundation and the EBRD have been supporting these efforts also on the recognition of the skills through the Turkey system. Thank you, Lida, for flagging this. We are 3 minutes from the end of our conversation, so I'd like to give the floor to Erja, because we're talking funds or not funds, and those who are giving funds, and the role also of those who are not giving funds, because the ETF is not directly giving funds. So when we talk about investments, how is the ETF contributing to ensuring that such investments do have an impact on education and training in labor market systems in the countries where it works? And I also know that you have an announcement to make.
Thank you, Daria. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
No, just to compliment first to what Anna said about the education reforms in the global south. I think we have seen from everywhere that it is a priority, but especially on the skills development side and on the lifelong learning side. Of course, there is a need for reforms at all levels. But what we are seeing is that there is, as I said earlier, in the EU priorities for example, Africa, I think from what I understand, 2/3 of the programming priorities include a skills development aspect, and this can be either a building and reforming in the level of schools, vocational education training centers and schools, but it can also be on sectoral approaches on what are the skills that are needed for the future in certain sectors. And agriculture is very strong, but also in the new context of greening. So there are different ways that we do reform the EU reforms education systems and helps countries in partnership to reform them. On the impact of our efforts, our joint efforts in globally in the world, it all starts from good planning. So we need to know what we need in the future. So what we are doing is a lot of studies on what are the future skills needs and for future anticipate the future skills that in different sectors, but also globally in terms of digital economy and green transition and what it means for what the labor market needs will need in the future. So we are working very much on that. Then we are also developing indicators, because you have to have very strong indicators to know to be able to measure the impact of our efforts, and that's another way of doing it. And then of course through evaluations and assessments. But we're running out of time, so I did want to say that we have a meeting next week to continue these discussions with our partners, with the European Investment Bank, the EBRD, but also other international financial institutions and national development banks and organizations to exactly discuss how we can put policy first in our investments and working with the private sector in our countries. So we have that discussion coming up on Tuesday next week, and we're very much looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Erja, and I invite also those of you of the participants who are following remotely from the geographic distribution we've seen before, that you can see, you will be able to see updates and to follow updates on all the ETF platforms about this conversation, which will last until next Tuesday under the campaign which we are running, but way beyond for the next months and and years. And I thank you all for being followed, and I thank our distinguished guests on this conversation about virtuous finance for education policies. So thanks a lot to Anna Canato, Head of Education and Public Research Projects Directorate at the European Investment Bank. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, Daria. It has been a great pleasure. Thank you all.
And thanks a lot to Erja Kaikkonen, Head of Policy and Public Outreach Department at the European Training Foundation. Thanks, Erja.
Thank you very much, Daria, and thank you, Anna and Mehmet. It was a good discussion.
And thanks also to Mehmet Uvez, Principal Inclusion Specialist and new Head of the Ankara Office of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Thanks a lot, Mehmet.
Thank you, Daria. Thank you, colleagues. This was a pleasure for me. Thank you, Anna.
And thanks to all of you who have been following this conversation. Stay with us still this week, because on Friday we'll have another discussion on a hackathon for green innovation together with our colleagues from UNIDO. So stay tuned, and thanks a lot. Have a lovely day.